Welcome to the Veriff Voices podcast, a collection of conversations with leaders from across the industry, sharing tips and valuable insight into shaping the future of online identity. This podcast is brought to you by the people of Veriff, rebuilding trust in the digital world. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Veriff Voices, the podcast where we talk about technology, fraud, compliance, and all things related to identity verification. Today, we're going to be exploring Latin America, which is an incredibly interesting region for Veriff, one where we have some amazing customers already, and we're growing all the time. Joining me to do so is Sasha Fasilkiotti. And Sasha, I'll throw it over to you to introduce yourself rather than me say anything about you. So tell us a little bit about you and your role, and then we can get started with the discussion.
Yeah, hi, Chris, and thank you for having me on the podcast. My name's Sasha. I'm a product manager here at Veriff. I focus on data verification product and also on our regional expansion. And today specifically talking about Latin America.
Awesome, thank you. And so what are these, the primary markets of focus in that region for Veriff then? I mean, I think, considering they're home to something like 80% of fintechs in the world, and I think as well, I think you mentioned to me before, this area sort of attracts the majority of venture investment as well as over the last sort of year or two. So what are those primary markets that we're particularly going to be talking about today?
Yeah, good question. I mean, Latin America is a big market, about over 25 countries, if I'm not mistaken. A small clarification there that 80% of fintechs in the Latin region are located in three markets, Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, which is the markets we're focusing on at the moment. We have operations globally, including other countries in the region. The origin of the business for Veriff in the market is with the traditionally global companies. So what we have felt was the time to do was focus on the very influential and large markets.
Okay, just give us a little bit of an overview of some of the what the sort of the market potential, I suppose, there, because I think in many people's minds, and certainly we've had these discussions internally here at Veriff too, I think potential is the key word when it comes to sort of Latin America as a region at whole. So just give us a sort of a little bit of an insight into that and what it means for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the most interesting aspects of the market is that Latin America is digitalizing really fast. It's a quite different environment from the more traditional markets of, let's say, quote unquote, Europe or North America. And this booming digitalization is what is very interesting for companies like Veriff, because obviously what we do is we enable people and companies to do more online in a safer environment. So markets that are heavily moving online are a really interesting market for us.
Absolutely, and I think it's one of those sort of situations too where it's not just an opportunity for Veriff, right? It's an opportunity for the residents of Latin America as well. I think their lives are changing, and businesses are changing there to accommodate them and providing new services for them all the time. So it's incredibly exciting. I think the level of mobile uptake, of internet usage, and those kinds of factors are really, really important to call out, and obviously play very strongly to Veriff's strengths. I think they probably also open up lots of opportunities for fraudsters and things like that too. So that's where we come in, I guess, to sort of provide that layer of support there.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things we actually hear a lot is that the users are actually a bit scared of going through these processes because there's so much fraud and so much kind of almost like an assumption that if you do something online, something will happen to your data. So building that trust, building that awareness for the users that there are ways to do things in a safe way is really, really important for the market at the moment.
That's good to hear. Yeah. So it plays to sort of Veriff's mission, doesn't it, of sort of providing a layer of trust to the internet there. And let's get into those regions that you mentioned then. So Colombia, Mexico, and Brazil. I think maybe let's go through them one by one, because I think they're all, there's a tendency, I think, sometimes to talk about Latin America as this kind of homogenous whole, but in actual fact, the markets within there are very, very different. There's a lot of regional sort of variation and that kind of thing. So let's break them down then. So let's start with Colombia. What would be the sort of the priority in the market in Colombia right now, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think in Colombia, you could definitely say that fraud prevention and the security is a very big focus. There's a lot of uncertainty over what happens to your personal data when you put it online. There's also quite a lot of the document tampering and the impersonation attempts that we're seeing. So for the businesses, it is very important to protect themselves from the risks, but it's also very important for the businesses to protect the end users from any potential risks. So that's a big focus. Another very interesting thing is that the region in general is digitalizing, but Colombia is also heavily promoting digital documents, which really changes the process. It is still in the early stages of adoption. I think there's at the moment still a bit more of the assumption that this is where the market will grow rather than the actual uptake, but more and more people are getting digital documents, and it does seem to be a trend that is there to stay.
Interesting. So what sort of stage then? I don't know if you could provide a little bit more clarity on that. So what sort of stage is the country as a whole at when it comes to that digital ID adoption? Is there any sort of numbers that can support it, or just to flesh that out a little bit more?
Yeah, I think there are some official numbers released, but from Veriff perspective, at the moment the amount of digital documents we're seeing is still quite low in the single-digit percentages. However, it is increasing. So, as I said, definitely a trend that is picking up.
Excellent. Okay. And do you see any sort of potential hurdles or kind of obstacles to overcome in that push towards digitalization when it comes to ID in Colombia? Are there kind of any tech limitations, for example?
It's definitely going to be a different process. So the traditional identity verification, went from, showing your passport in person to a clerk, right? To taking images of your document, which is also what, what Veriff is doing, what the competitors are also doing. And the digital documents mean that there's actually nothing to show. So it definitely relies a lot more on the biometrics. It becomes more of a biometrics and the specific personal data that gets validated against the usually government sources. So it will change the experience for the user. I wouldn't necessarily say that there are technological limitations as such. There are technological limitations on the market in general, and again, comparing to the more traditional markets for IDV, for as European Union or North America, the quality of networks in general in Latin America is lower, which means that any process that heavily relies on data transfer over the networks is more difficult in Latin America. There are also effects of the types of the devices that are common on the market. The quality of the images that they take, the sharpness of the images that they take, all of that plays an effect. It just means that the algorithms that are running on the market, they have to be tailored. They have to take that into account. The amount of data that we can process and how we process it has to be adjusted. But again, I wouldn't really call it a specific problem per se.
Yeah, it is a nuance though, isn't it? And something that a company like Veriff is used to dealing with, because we are a sort of a very global company in our nature, and these kind of things, I think we sort of taken our stride a little bit. Let's talk a little bit around the sort of types of businesses that we are sort of seeing emerging then, and in terms of our own customer base, but also those other customers that we're working with or we're looking to work with. Is it? I'm guessing that is primarily in the fintech space, and if so, what would be the sort of the types of areas within that you've seen the most growth in?
Yeah, FinServ is always the first best guess when it comes to identity verification, right? It's the most regulated, has usually the most financial risk associated with it. So definitely financial services, where we mostly see identity verification is in the initial onboarding stages of the end users, but also in the recovery processes. For example, like account recovery, where we do biometric authentication in order to validate that the user is still the same user that was originally onboarded. So these are the two spots, the re-verification at certain points, whether account recovery, as I've already mentioned, or certain higher risk transactions, and the initial onboarding are the two main focus areas for the financial services. But in general, reality, I think where's a population in the world with more and more concerned with validating that the person is actually who they're saying they are, because I think we're more and more aware of how easy it is becoming to pretend to be someone else, right? So definitely financial services are not the only ones who are thinking about verifying identities. There's quite a lot of use cases in the mobility, from verifying the drivers that are driving the shared car economy to actually verifying the people who are actually driving the inside. They're not driving, but to verifying the people who are actually using the services in order to protect the business and the driver as well. So there's definitely more and more of that. Event access is a big one. I think another big topic that has popped up in the recent years is the social platforms, validating that it's actually the actual person behind the account, and it is the person who they say they are, because a lot of our interactions are moving online, right? And that means that even social interactions are moving online, and that means that protecting ourselves in that environment is also becoming more and more important.
Absolutely. That's a really good overview. Thank you. And is there a sort of an acceptance? You kind of alluded to this at the beginning, actually, around a little bit of a suspicion, I guess, from the sort of the end users around internet transactions, more generally speaking, I think, and kind of an acceptance of a certain level of fraud, I suppose. There is that something that you've seen sort of in Colombia specifically? And I guess what I'm getting at is that do you think the end users there are willing to accept a certain level of friction if the trade-off is that they have more guarantee of their safety of their data and less intrusion from fraudsters and things like that too? Do you think that's something that is kind of requiring of education, or do you think it's something that's kind of an acceptance in the sort of the level of the regular person on the street there? I would say.
I think there is, to an extent. I think the process, the onboarding process in general, the way to think about it is a kind of like a balance, right? So every step that moves the user closer to the end goal, every step where they have a good experience is a plus. And then every step that's a friction, every step which maybe caused confusion or was hard to pass, that's a subtraction. And the process is successful if in the end you're in the plus. Because if in the end you're in the plus, then the user is much more likely to have gone through the whole process, right? So there's definitely a certain level of friction that can be acceptable if it makes the user feel safer. It also depends on what the user is trying to do. So if you're doing some sort of something that like requires a quick decision where you might rethink your action, then you can't really have a lot of friction. However, if you're quite motivated, so let's say signing up for payment services, right? Usually you actually really need access to that service. And in that situation, you as a user would actually be willing to go through a bit more friction. What also we've been seeing on the market is that, especially with like loan applications, one of the vectors of fraud is that there are companies that kind of seem like they could give a loan, but in reality they're actually taking the data from the user. So the users are, on one hand, they both want the loan, but on the other hand, they also don't really want to put in the personal information because they might be worried that someone will actually take that and actually take a loan on their behalf, right? And in this case, actually, what often works is putting the identity verification where you actually have to input the personal data a bit further down in the process, where the user has already more confidence that it's a legitimate process and they're actually getting something out of it, which is, I think, slightly different in some other markets where identity verification actually comes first.
Let's move to one of those other markets that you mentioned then. I think let's take a cast our eye towards sort of Mexico now, because again, there's some sort of unique traits to this market that don't apply anywhere else, and there are some nuances. There obviously are some similarities as well. But I know one of the things that stands out, just from a conversation that you and I have had before, is around the issue of manual data input. I know that in Mexico this is still very, very common. Can you tell us a little bit about that and sort of what are the main challenges that you're seeing with it when it comes to the work that Veriff does?
Yeah, so I think traditionally in the Latin American market, Mexico in particular, there's been a bit more reliance on the manual in-house teams than you would see in some other markets. Quite a bit of the process, so where an automated solution might not immediately give expected results, whereas, like, let's say in Europe, the action is to retry the automated process again. Then in Mexico, you might have a person picking up the phone or going to WhatsApp and reaching to the user saying, "Hey, can you please make sure that you uploaded good pictures, or can you please help us validate what the number is?" And I think it is a trend that is going to go away more and more, because it is quite a hassle and it does extend the processes. But this is where the differences come from the providers like Veriff, who have actually put a lot of effort into building the messaging to the end user to make sure that the end user actually in the flow is given immediate feedback on the quality of the images that they're submitting, on the process, on the expectations, how to go through the flow successfully. Where if that is present, then you need less manual intervention from your in-house team to follow up. But that is a process where it's an adoption process. So there's definitely education that is still happening, and also the realization that more can be done automatically and faster.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. So let's the same question that I asked about Colombia. Let's apply that to Mexico as well. What are the main sort of businesses that we're seeing here then, and that are adopting the tools and solutions that Veriff offers? Again, I'm assuming it's in the financial services space primarily, but just give a bit more detail to that.
It's definitely financial services. Like Colombia, Mexico is still quite reliant on actual government, physical government IDs. You still have to have the document present at the onboarding for it to follow the regulatory guidelines. So where Veriff comes in Mexico is the fraud prevention algorithms, the additional layers of security that are required by the regulations, right? So we have connections to the INE registry. We have also biometric validation also for the government registry, which are mainly needed in the financial sector.
I see. Got it. And are there any other sort of industries or sectors that are of interest to Veriff at the moment, or that you're seeing a lot of interest in us for, I should say?
I think it is quite similar, to be honest. Financial services are quite wide, right? It's payments, it's buy now, pay later. It's loan applications and so on. But I do think that event access is also quite interesting in general. I would say that is kind of general for the region as well, because there's it's a large population countries, and have a lot of events meant for a lot of people, which means that managing that is also quite a challenge that could benefit from automated solutions.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we sort of intimated to this earlier on, but Veriff is obviously a global company. We have businesses and people in various parts of the world. I think when it comes to something as sensitive as dealing with customer data, businesses quite often would want to deal with a company that they know and trust and that's possibly local to them as well. So what are some of the steps that Veriff is as a global company is taking to remedy that? And sort of, is it just a matter of getting boots on the ground? Are there sort of product adjustments and things like that too that you could talk about that sort of show that the Veriff is really committed to these markets and to Mexico in particular? And what are some of the steps there that you're seeing that from Veriff's point of view, just to sort of reassure the local market that we're in this for the long term?
Yeah, so we do we do both. We do have a local team present. We have local solutions engineering teams present as well. We have local product presence as well. So all of that to make sure that the customer is that we're there for the customer, that we can be in their time zone, we can answer their questions on time, and also that we can actually we really truly understand the culture and the market. So yes, our technology comes from our European headquarters, and our data storage also and the security practices come from Europe. But we do put a lot of effort into making sure that we are also able to understand our customers in their own environment. And there's definitely product adjustments happening tailored to specific markets. Some of them are driven by regulations. Some of them, we've also touched on it, that the technology and the environment is a little bit different. Networks are a bit different. Devices are a bit different, which means that to make sure that our customers get the best service possible, also our processes have to be tailored to them. And we've touched on this briefly, and we've mostly talked about Colombia and Mexico now, but for example, in Brazil, you actually don't have to have a physical document while going through the onboarding flow. So there are those adjustments that in some jurisdictions you can actually have less steps. You can identify a user without having them go through the whole taking the pictures step-by-step process. And that is something that we are focusing on, making sure that we deliver product that best suits the market.
Amazing. That's great. Thank you. Yeah. Let's take the conversation to Brazil next then, because that seems like a good jumping off point. Again, I'm going to go for 3 out of 3 and guess that financial services is the main industry here. Is that the case? Is it a very similar story to what you've seen in the other two countries?
Yeah, I think that financial services are always best guess, and I actually think that in reality the other industries that I will name will also follow. Event taxes, mobility, right, delivery. I don't think I will surprise anyone with the industries where identity verification services are needed. Perhaps one interesting call out is the gaming industry, because like new gaming laws have recently come into effect, which made the gaming industry in Brazil higher priority, higher interest. But in general, I would still say that financial services are always a good bet.
Absolutely. Yeah, I thought that might be the case. And so let's talk about the fraud landscape there a little bit too, because I think that's something that maybe we haven't touched on for some of the others. But what is it? What types of fraud, I guess, are sort of businesses seeing there? And are they sort of comparable to other regions of the globe?
I think the fraud itself is comparable. In general, as an identity provider, you would see attempts to tamper the data on the document, attempts by someone to use someone else's document, and then you would have kind of like organized fraud rings who would try and like repeat a certain transaction many times, and then you would have those so-called farming cases where you would have a person guiding other people into doing verification without them quite realizing what they're doing it for. So I would say that the general types of fraud are similar, but so far our experience in the Latin American market is that the fraud rate is higher than you would see in some other markets.
Interesting. And does that play in as well to the kind of the ROI argument, I suppose, around Veriff as well? I'm sort of just steering it a little bit towards cost here as well. Is the sort of the price points and things like that for the services and the solutions that Veriff provides, is it sort of tailored to region as well? I mean, I'm assuming that there's a how people prioritize kind of the cost over convenience and that kind of thing. Is that something that you're seeing as well, or is it is that a fairly sort of adaptable situation?
I think it does have its effect on the process. So to the comparison, in some other markets, an IDV piece is often one of the cheaper parts of the process, which means that IDV would be one of the first steps taken to onboard a user, whereas in Latin America, often the IDV piece will be on the more expensive part of the scale, which means that it will sit further in the back in order to optimize the costs, because also the companies are perhaps a bit more cost sensitive than in some other markets. Whereas, let's say engineering work and engineering maintenance needed might be a more expensive cost than putting IDV somewhere in the front and just leaving it as a one piece in one market. In the other market, optimizing for that cost itself is more important. So maybe a bit more complex technical setup would be tolerated in order to spend less to onboard a user. So that we are seeing quite a bit. You could have situations where, let's say, like a registry check will be done first, and only if that is successful, then the user will be taken to IDV. Whereas in some other countries, you actually would want to decrease the friction of gathering the data from the user, so you would actually do IDV first and use that data extracted from IDV to do all the upstream checks. So cost does have an effect on how the markets operate.
Let's get some predictions from you then for the sort of the next 12 months. So what do you think? Well, first of all, what are Veriff's sort of initiatives over that time, and what do you expect the market situation? How do you expect the market situation to develop in all three of the countries that we've discussed today?
Yeah. So in terms of Veriff's developments, I think one of the recent big developments we've done was the integration with in Mexico for the biometric verification of the users with the INE government database. I think the external sources is something we're putting a lot of focus on for the Latin markets that we are going after. And the reason for that is the expectations for the market that with the growing digitalization, biometrics will become more and more important. Being able to use the person's face to identify them will become more important, partially because the digital documents are becoming more and more important, but also because it allows for less friction in the process.
Awesome. Thanks very much. Yeah, I like that. That's it's good to hear. As I say, this is an incredibly important region for us, and we expect to see some big things there. So, Sasha, let's just wrap things up there. Thank you very much for joining us. I always appreciate it. I know you're incredibly busy, so thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me here.
No worries. And thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll catch you next time. This podcast is brought to you by Veriff. Identity verification made simple. Learn more at veriff.com.